us during Blair is going to be helping us during the last part of today's webinar, which is going to be a role play. So we're going to do a little bit of role play of mediation for you. So welcome to the two of you, and thanks for helping us out here. Also joining us kind of behind the scenes today is Jason Bliss, who is Executive Director of Walker, and he's going to be helping if folks come in late. He's going to be doing a little bit of the behind the scenes technical support. So thank you, Jason. Good to have everybody here. So I want to dive in. We have so much content to cover. We're going to try to do this in an hour and a half, but I guarantee you we're going to use the whole time. And may even go over if we're trying to squeeze in one or two last points. So understand that folks have busy schedules and you can be with us as long as you can, but this will be recorded. And so if you need to catch the recording later, that's fine too. So I'm going to just a couple logistics things. If you want to ask a question along the way in the chat, feel free to do that, or let us know that you have a question, and that's fine too. Jason, if you wouldn't mind just being in touch with those, and Jason has our permission to just interrupt us with any question that feels like it would help with participants' understanding of the of what we're talking about. Otherwise, we'll kind of hang on to those until some breaks in the session to be able to answer those. And any other technical kinds of questions, you can send a chat straight to Jason, and he'll try to help you out. So really, again, appreciate you all being here. So one more logistical thing, I'm gonna shut my camera off. It'll help me keep track of notes and all that kind of stuff better. Just trying to manage my screens and all of that, and it might be a little less distracting than seeing me watching me do that. So and then I'll be back when we do the role play. We decided we all be back on the screen with you. So here we go. In the first training that we did on conflict that we asked you all to watch ahead of time, we discussed how conflict, when it's handled properly in a recovery residence, can lead to a deeper trust in relationships. So when it goes badly, of course, we know that it can end relationships, and it can make life really difficult in our homes where people are so tightly connected to each other. And so this is especially important in our homes where people are learning to have healthy relationships, and maybe even for the first time. And so how to do conflict, that's why we really wanted you to spend a little bit of time with that session, just to get your arms around how conflict works. And and those of you who work in this field know for sure kind of what it looks like on the ground, but hopefully there are some tips in there to help you kind of navigate conflict in the home. And we're diving a little deeper in there today, and to try to help you, give you some really concrete tools to help people navigate conflict. And as we know, addiction is a life or death kind of situation, and so when people are having relationship difficulties, it can often drive them back to old behavior in a way that's really, really toxic. And those patterns that people that we learn when we're not healthy tend to persist even when we're sober. Those things don't just go away. And so learning how to do conflict is vitally important. A fairly common situation that happens in our recovery homes, where residents have roommates in their rooms, is they'll come to us and they'll ask, hey, I want a room change. I'm done with this person. I don't want to hang out with them anymore. We just have irreconcilable differences. There'll be a lot of ways to say that. Sometimes they'll just say, I just want to try something different. But we've learned over time that there's almost always a conflict there that could be resolved. And so we don't automatically grant the roommate change. We don't automatically say, you bet, we'll just put you in another room. We ask that they try to work through the conflict first. And sometimes they can do that on their own, but often they may need a third person to kind of help them navigate that conflict. So one of the most important goals of our program is to help residents learn how to do it, how to navigate conflict. And so this process becomes really important in that, and you'll see kind of along the way as we describe the process to you, that it just kind of provides a template or a roadmap for people so that even after this process, they can take the tools that they learn in mediation and apply them to other conversations that they have with each other. And so the hope is they not only resolve the present conflict, but they actually can get to a place of being able to do conflict better. So the process that we're going to walk through today is not unique to us. We didn't make it up. Those of us who have been trained in the mediation process I've learned that this is the basic framework that's used around the world. There may be some variations of this, but when people come to the table in international, peacemaking efforts, this is basically the format that they use. When people come together to negotiate parenting plans, this is the format that they use. When they talk about property division or two neighbors get together to try to resolve something and there's a mediator involved, this is generally speaking the process that they use. So we're going to do this in an hour and a half, what normally takes about 40 hours to train a mediator in the basics of mediation. So hang on. We're not going to be as thorough as we could be, obviously, but we want to just give you some really concrete tools, a kind of a way of walking through this that will help you kind of on the ground. So we admittedly aren't going to do the topic justice, but we're going to do the best we can. If you like what you're learning here, we strongly recommend that you go find a 40-hour training course in mediation. Those of us who have done that find that it's extremely helpful in our work with our homes, and I use it. I've used it in church settings. I've used it in other business settings. I've helped mediate conflicts with other nonprofit organizations in our community, and so this is a skill set that will serve you really well, no matter what. All right, so let's talk about what we're going to do today then. We'll go to the next slide. So really basically, we're going to talk through the basics of mediation, kind of what the components are. We're going to then dive into the process itself. We're going to talk about what we do before a mediation meeting. We're going to talk about what the meeting looks like. We're going to, in the midst of that, talk about the communication skills that you'll be using with folks. Some of this is review, but it has a very specific kind of a place in the mediation process. We're going to go through the basics of an opening statement, building an agenda for the meeting, what a caucus is, if that's a word that you don't use every day, you're going to learn what that's about, what the negotiation process looks like, and then after the meeting, what a follow-up might look like. We're going to put it all together in just with some summary kinds of conversation, and then we're going to show a role play, like I mentioned before. So we are going to Brianna and Blair are going to pretend to be roommates, and I'm going to act as mediator and give you just a real quick sense of what it looks like. So that's kind of how we're going to spend our time. So let's talk about what mediation is. And I'll give you the textbook definition and unpack it a little bit. But essentially, mediation is a process by which trust is built between two or more people, so that they can achieve the relationship that they desire in order to function. So the participants make decisions rather than having them made for them. So this is so important that when you come into mediation, if you're mediating a conflict with somebody, the best solution is going to be one that you come up with, as opposed to other kinds of processes. So what mediation is not is the mediator solving the problems of the participants. So that's more like arbitration or adjudication. Those are two words you might be familiar with. So if something is, if you go to an arbiter, that person's job is to solve the problem or tell you the way it's going to be, or a judge in a courtroom setting would do that, say in a child custody case or something like that, or small claims court or whatever it is, the judge decides. Mediation is not that. So the mediator does not play the role of judge. Really, really important. It's not a quick fix. If the goal of mediation is to help rebuild trust, then that has been dissolved, we know that trust erodes over time, and that mediation itself then is part of a process to rebuild trust. But that is a process, and it's going to take some time. So let's talk about the process a little bit. We're going to walk through the basics. and we're going to we are recording, as I said before, and so if you don't feel tons of pressure to take notes, sometimes it's helpful to keep you focused. But and we'll make the slides available for you as well. So, but if anything stands out, feel free to write it down for yourself. But so here's what the process looks like before the meeting happens. The mediator. Let me say something real quick about the role. If you are a house director, like at the staff level, or a peer in the house, a peer leader in the house, if there is, you might be the best person to mediate something. But if there's somebody else in your organization, or even outside of your organization, or someone in another house that has this training, it might be best to have someone else in, because that we kind of run into the dual role problem. And so just food for thought, that if a couple of you are trained to do this and you can sort of help each other's residents, that might be really helpful. Where someone from outside the house could come in who's not perceived to have any kind of bias, or kind of we really want that person to be an uninvolved kind of third party that can be a better mediator if they're a little bit detached from the situation. So all of that said, before a meeting starts, then the mediator, that's going to be you, regardless of where you're doing it, but you're going to talk with both parties, and you're going to ask a couple different questions. So we'll get to some real specific ones, but ahead of the meeting, you want to know what are the major issues. You familiarize yourself with them a little bit. And we're gonna ask participants to write them down in a way so that they come up to, when they come up in the mediation, that they are kind of organized about that. And also, you want to make sure as mediator that when you get into the mediation, if there's something that felt really major in that meeting ahead of the mediation, that comes up somehow, that you prompt them to say, hey, when we talked before, you mentioned something about such and such. Do you want to talk about that? And so it just kind of keeps them focused, and it allows you to know the situation a bit before you come in. So then you want to know, what do they want to get out of the mediation process? So again, you're not the person determining what the outcome is supposed to be, that the participants are. So what do the participants want to see as an outcome in the mediation? And then obviously, if you were in their shoes, you would want to know what the process is going to look like. What's this meeting going to be about? And what are the questions going to be, or what am I going to be expected to do? So so we want to be sure that each person's comfortable with what's going to happen ahead of time, so that we try to alleviate as much anxiety as we can. And I'll say it here, that your role as mediator then is to create safety in that conversation. You're there to ensure that that the ground rules are followed, and so that people can feel like they can share what's going on with them in a safe environment. So the meeting itself, let's talk about that. There is, let's go to the next slide if we can. Here we go. So makes sense that the location is really important. So we want it to be on, if there's any kind of neutral territory. Sometimes that might be a living room in a house, but sometimes there might be too much traffic or other residents floating in and out. This really needs to be a confidential kind of setting. So it needs to be neutral. It needs to feel safe to both people, not to one and not the other. And then it needs to be private. And so the point is that the mediator needs to not appear to have any kind of bias toward one person or the other. And if some of that exists, where just the mediator knows one of the people a lot better than the other, and there's any kind of perception that that the mediator is going to have strong feelings about what's going on, best to find another person. So again, back to the location, let's show that we did a little diagram here to kind of illustrate kind of how we might set up a room. So you have two participants, and you want them as much as possible in kind of a parallel place, and then the mediator somewhere in the middle, or in a third place that's sort of equidistant between the other two. So in other words, if you have a couch and a chair, you're not going to have the mediator and a participant sitting on the couch, and then the other participant in the chair, right? If that's all you have, then you're going to have two participants sitting on the couch, maybe at the far ends of the couch, but and then the mediator's at a chair kind of facing them. Best to have three chairs if you can, all kind of in a three, like this, where and if possible, maybe even at a table so that they can write if they need to write something down along the way. So we typically like to have mediations around a round table, or a table, if it's going to be a rectangular table, then two people across from each other, and then the mediator at the end of the table. All right, so that just gives you so you kind of see how neutrality, we're always modeling neutrality through this whole thing, that the mediator is literally in the middle. All right. So I think we're going to talk about communication skills next. Just am I right?
Yep.
Yeah. All right. And are you going to do this one?
Yep. Yeah, I'll go
Okay.
ahead and do this one.
Perfect. So here's
All
Bree.
right. Yeah, thanks, Alan, and thanks for that introduction. I'm really glad everybody's here today. So we're going to get into communication skills. And like Alan said, maybe some of this isn't new to you, but it has such specific place in the mediation and in helping participants to learn to talk to each other. So some of the skills we're going to be talking about is listening, understanding common ground, wants, feelings, and values, reflecting, reframing, neutralizing questions, and summarizing. So if you think about it, really, the poor communication skills are often at the heart of the conflict itself. That's where we're help we're like role models to help the participants learn good communication skills and to encourage that communication between each other. So we're also using these skills not only to help understand what's going on and to uncover what's going on deeper, but we're also trying to connect the participants together, find that common ground that can connect them and bring resolution. So, and it helps build rapport. It helps to build trust between the participants, and then it also helps encourage just that respectful environment where good things can happen from. Yeah. So I'm going to the next slide. So what all of these communication skills have in common would be active listening. So I'm just going to touch on that a little bit. So the first one would be just pay attention. So be attentive and demonstrate that you're interested in what the person has to say. So this can involve your body language, your eye contact, facial gestures, just being aware of what's going on with your face and your body, and verbalizing back to them. So it might not be a whole statement, but just, yeah. So just letting them know that you're paying attention. And it can also include mirroring. So mirroring the pace of speech. So let's say you have somebody who is kind of a slower talker, kind of toning down your pace to match that to make them feel comfortable. Another area would be showing interest. So just by doing this, such as asking questions, using all these communication skills that we're talking about, body language, nodding, eye contact, things like that. And then another one would be avoiding judgment. So like what Alan was saying earlier, just wanting to remain neutral, even if something that somebody says might bring something up within yourself, just being aware of that and being aware of just avoiding criticism or how you're looking or how it's appearing to affect you, because we really want to show both parties that we're neutral and that we don't judge them, to give them that comfort to open up and get to the root of what's going on. Okay, and then the last one would just be avoiding common mistakes. Some common ones, and I was guilty of this in the beginning as well, as like just fidgeting, or maybe you have a paper and you're scribbling, because that's not showing interest. So just being aware of maybe you're thinking about what question you're going to ask and not really listening fully to the person. So just avoiding those common mistakes and being aware, because it really does take a lot of concentration to hear what the person is saying. So okay, So this is a chart that I built that kind of shows what's going on with the person. So we could think of each other as, an iceberg in a way. So on the very tip of the iceberg, it's the wants. So it's important that we realize that the wants is like the issue. So it's really could be seen as what translates into, you know, uh, what I want. I have to have it this way, or I won't do that. So that could be seen as like the issue that they're coming in to the mediation with. It's usually pretty clear and made visible to each other. So that stuff's showing. What's not showing all the way could be how they feel. So this could be how they feel about each other, how they feel about the issue or the situation. And the reason why that's on the surface of the water in this illustration is to show that sometimes they make you aware of how they feel, but what they're making you aware of is maybe only partially of what's going on. So let's say someone's showing that they're angry or upset, but underneath they could be hurt too. So yeah, the whole point of our role in mediation is to really by listening to them and by just being really attentive and asking the right questions to uncover those hidden emotions, and then even deeper underneath the hidden values. So the values way kind of at the bottom is usually the part that we're wanting to get at. It's could be considered their values or their interests, and you could think of this as the needs that they're really trying to satisfy. So values and interest are really important factors in the mediation because, like I said, they're often the root causes. So values are considered deeply held beliefs and principles that guide a person's behavior and decision making, while interests are the underlying needs, desires, and concerns. So it's
So
really
you're
important.
saying that they may bring something to the table that isn't their real value. It's more like a surface issue, but there's
Yes,
something underneath
exactly.
that we're trying to dig for. Is that
Yes,
that's a great way to
exactly.
illustrate it with these
Yeah.
icebergs. Yeah.
Yeah, and then the common ground is what connects the individual. So this is here I have a actual definition. So common ground is bridging the gap between differing attitudes, beliefs, and experiences. And I always think of it as like seeking the common value. So if we're thinking in those terms of like what's the emotion and what's the value as they're talking, that can really help find that common ground and what's in the interest of both people, because this could be a really good starting point for negotiation. So okay, so one of the first communication skills we're gonna be talking about is going to be reflecting. And so reflecting is really to reflect to the person speaking the emotion and the content of the message. Um, so it's important, it's just like basically restating the feelings and or, the message that you're hearing. And this is an important tool because it really helps not only you understand the message more fully, but it also helps the person speaking understand, their thoughts and feelings better, as well as the other person in the room understand the situation as well. And no matter how great of listeners we think we are, we don't know if we have it right unless we kind of check in with the person about it. And it's not offering your perspective, but carefully just listening to what the person has to say and what could be underneath it. And this doesn't even have to so much be the words, but perhaps they're portraying an emotion just by their body language, the way they're saying it, their demeanor. So it's really not just the words, but it's also everything else that's going on with the person. Um, so I'm going to give you some examples and then we could do a practice one together and you can put it in the chat. How many people do we have? We could even raise your hand and say it as well if you want to. So, and Alan's going to be the the first.
The actor. I'm going to
Yes,
be the
exactly.
actor.
He's
There I
gonna
go.
be a participant, and then I'll be the mediator. I'll read the reflection part. Okay.
Right. So I hate assigning chores to Joe. He always waits until the very last minute to do it, which means I have to stay awake in order to check and see if he gets it done.
Yeah. Okay. So this could be it reflected back to him. So sounds like you're feeling frustrated and tired because Joe tends to delay completing the chores you assign him until the last minute. So perhaps he's saying this in a way where he just seems, exhausted and a little frustrated as well. Excuse me.
That's it. You really get me. All right.
Okay.
John is always late when I agree to pick him up from his meeting with his counselor. Oh boy, sorry, I've got to move my thing. With his counselor. It's like he socializes before leaving. He doesn't care that I'm in the car waiting and is cutting into my free time before I go to work.
Mhm. Yeah, we can reflect this back. You could say you feel disrespected because John is frequently late when you arrange to pick him up. It seems like he socializes before leaving, and you feel this isn't valuing your time or respecting your schedule. You can
Right.
kind of check in with them and say, is this accurate?
Mhm.
And then here's a practice one. So go ahead and we'll have Alan read it, and then you can practice and think of reflecting back the message as well as the emotion. What do you think the emotion might be behind it? So,
I'm just fed up seeing dirty clothes and messes everywhere. I've tried telling her so many times, she just doesn't listen.
yeah, thanks. And then Jason, or could you read maybe a few of those that come in? We'll give him a minute. I'll pull up the chat too. So how could you say this back that portrays the content of the emotion?
So something along the lines, I, if I hear you correctly, you're feeling frustrated because you're now living out of your element. You're used to keeping your room nice and tidy, doing your laundry when it comes up, and you're also feeling frustrated because you've had a few different conversations with the individual, but they're just not quite getting what you're throwing down and where you're coming from.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and I'll even show what I said just for time's sake. Well, yeah, the way I reflected it is you're feeling at a loss and uncertain as to what to do from here. You feel despite the attempts to communicate, you haven't noticed any changes. So yeah, Jason, I would
And
have probably, yeah.
in a couple other comments, Karen had posted, you are feeling frustrated when you have to repeatedly ask her to pick up her messes and clothes. You aren't sure how to get your message across so she hears you. Stephanie had commented, what I'm hearing you is that you are feeling frustrated and ignored by your roommates when you try to communicate your needs.
Mhm. Yeah. The only thing I would maybe withhold from one of those statements is to pick up her messes, just
Mhm.
so it can kind of appear neutral and that you're not siding with the other person, that she is, maybe she feels like she's not making messes or what have you. But yeah, exactly. As long as you think of it in those terms of what's the emotion and how can I restate this message? So we'll go on to, thank you guys so much for putting those in the chat. Go on to the next one. So the next one we're going to be talking about is reframing. So this is speaking to the underlying wants. And I put in parentheses values because when I'm reframing, I always think of it that way, like what could be the value underneath this. So speaking to the underlying wants instead of what's lacking or wrong, you put into language the other party can more easily hear. So you're actually reframing a message in a way that trying to speak to what's underneath it, and then trying to put it in a way that is more easily digested by the other party, I guess would be the word I'll use. Okay. Well, and so reframing it's just a powerful tool. So we can explore different perspectives even this way. We can explore their underlying interests and their needs by doing it. And I guess the whole goal of this is just to move away from their positions and focus on, again, the underlying interests and values, which then can help us connect them together and work towards an agreement. So Alan can go ahead and read this.
Okay. I hate the way she talks to me. It's so rude and disrespectful. I would never treat anyone like that.
Mhm. Yeah, and reframed, we can say, you feel hurt over what was said and done. Respect and kindness are important to you.
All right. Whenever the other girls celebrate my achievements in the house meeting, she doesn't acknowledge me. It's so rude. She sits there with a sour look on her face.
Mhm. Yeah, and you can kind of reframe. This is what I put for a reframe is so getting positive recognition from everyone in the group for your achievements matters to you. You value and appreciate the support you receive from your housemates. We can go ahead and do a
Right.
practice one too. Is
Practice
that-
one for everyone else to participate in.
Yeah.
All right. I want to leave when she goes off like that. She doesn't let me get a word in.
Yeah. So you guys can try it, but you could see in the other examples, kind of trying to uncover, like in this first example, respect and kindness, like trying to uncover the value, like maybe they value kindness and respect. So kind of checking in with them, like respect and kindness are important to you, bringing that up instead of you don't like the way she talks to you, sort of. And then yeah, for the other one. So valuing the support you receive from your housemates. Obviously, that's affecting her. That's important to her. So trying to think of, yeah, what's important for the person. So you guys can go ahead and unmute or try to just, yeah, reframe this in the chat for me. That would be so helpful for everyone. So what could somebody's values be who wants to leave when someone's quote going off on them and not letting them talk? Hmm.
Stephanie posted a comment in there. Being heard and understood is important to you. It sounds like you feel unimportant when you aren't listened to.
I like that. Stephanie, yes, I think that's great.
And Nikki typed in respect.
Yeah. Well, it's really good. Yeah, and I'll show you what I said. You desire to have equal input in the conversation and feel like what you say is heard. You value equality. But yes, it can definitely be those other things too. I really like what Stephanie said with that. Good job. Okay, we'll move on to our next skill. So this one is my favorite. It's neutralizing language. To neutralize language, we're basically just removing inflammatory or toxic language when we reflect or reframe. So we're intentionally using words to try to neutralize what was said, so it to make it more unbiased and non-judgmental, because by reflecting something back that was inflammatory, it could really make the conflict, kind of puff it up and get everyone on edge a little more. So by using the neutral language, we as the mediator can help create a safe and non-threatening space for participants to communicate without fear of being judged. So it can also help depersonalize the conflict too, because we're focusing on the issues rather than the personalities. Let's give you some examples, and we do this as well when we get into building agenda, because sometimes just from experience, people can, when you're creating the agenda, can bring up topics and have it be really kind of inflammatory. So always remembering to neutralize what's being said. So
Here
here's,
goes.
yep, go ahead.
She got into a screaming match with me. She needs to learn some respect.
Yeah. So neutralized. There was a loud conversation between you that left you feeling disrespected. Another thing I didn't touch on is like saying it in the past tense too helps to neutralize it even more. So just thinking in those terms as well. Like putting it in the past. So yeah, there was a loud conversation between you two that left you feeling disrespected. So instead of screaming match, so this is more neutral because instead of screaming match and learn some respect, it focuses on communication instead of respectful communication instead of those other things. Okay, here's another one.
Okay. He purposefully spilled his coffee in my car, and we got into a huge fight because he wouldn't take responsibility for being so careless. He's an idiot.
Yeah. So neutralized here can say simply coffee was spilled in the car, resulting in a disagreement over who is responsible. So this one's more neutral because it avoids, assigning blame, such as purposely and idiot. So let's go on and do a practice one.
Okay, here we go. I want to discuss Becca being a slob and always leaving dirty clothes in the sink. Oh, dishes. Sorry, that's worse. Dishes in the sink. She left her anyway. That's a whole other thing.
Yeah. So this could be a good example of one that might come up when you're building the agenda. So I thought it would be good to figure out how to neutralize this statement. What could you say to neutralize it, to show that you heard what they said, but also, take out that inflammatory language. And then, making it neutral for both people.
Something like, it sounds like dirty dishes are always being left in the sink and causing a fundamental disagreement about what a clean kitchen should look like.
Yeah. I would probably just leave it shorter than that. And I'll just give you my example just for, you want to discuss solutions to cleaning your shared space, right? We just want to take out any sort of like hints or anything that the person is doing that, because then that could appear that you're siding with one person rather than the other. So you don't want to kind of reiterate the fact that they're being dirty, but you want to focus more on, what the issue is.
Got you.
Yeah. Anybody? Well, I guess I shared mine, but anyone else have a way to neutralize it before we move on to the next one?
I think neutralizing, my experience is neutralizing is probably one of the most important skills, being able to restate something in a way that's kind of not loaded so that the other person can hear it in an unloaded kind of way. I find this to be really helpful. And just I use this every day in just regular life, just unloading people's speech so that maybe the message can get through more clearly. So
Yeah.
a really good one.
And it helps model that communication skills to
Yeah.
them as well. Okay, going on to questions. So these are super important as well. And so kind of the role of questions and mediation is to gather information, to generate options, and to expand perspectives.
And Bree, if I could chime in real quick, one other comment that
Oh,
Gail had made on the previous thing was reducing any element of blame.
exactly. Yeah, that's how I think of it. And I feel like it's really helpful. It's just, removing that blame and saying it in a way, that everyone can digest. So open-ended questions, there's such a huge component to try to uncover the wants and feelings that may be hidden. So people can give us our message, but we could even take that deeper by asking these questions to try to uncover, what's really underneath there. So I'll give you some examples, as well as not only that, but as well as making things clear for the other party as well.
All I
So,
want is a clean room. Becca doesn't know how to clean it all.
yeah. So you can, a
Wait, Becca's
question.
a real problem, it seems like.
A question that I put is, well, what does a clean room look like to you? Perhaps her idea of a clean room is just like wiping the counter in the bathroom off, it's not a full deep clean, but the other person doesn't know that. They just, So just really taking it even deeper to help break it down for everybody.
Okay, ready? She won't let me, I'm sorry, she won't let me keep the light on past 9 p.m. She's totally unreasonable.
Yeah. So question back could be, why is keeping the light on later important to you? So perhaps we uncover some value in there by asking that question.
Mhm.
Here's just another
Okay.
example of,
I don't know what to say.
yeah, what can you tell me about this situation? So, so you could see how they can gather information, generate some options, and expand perspectives. And we'll do a practice one. Go ahead, Alan.
All right. I don't know how to stick. Sorry, I don't know how to stick to a cleaning schedule. They don't work for me.
Yeah. What do you guys think? What could be a good question to ask?
Perhaps, I guess, try and drill down on it a little bit just to figure out what exactly about the cleaning schedule that doesn't work for you.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, that could be one. Anyone else? Yeah. See in the chat, Stephanie said what feels difficult about the cleaning schedule. Exactly.
Mhm.
When you clean, where do you start normally? Yeah, and I put, what other options have you considered? Because perhaps they know that cleaning schedules don't work, and maybe they have thought of other options that might be um, more helpful,
Mhm.
But all those questions are great.
So Bree and Alan, I'm is the, I guess, the theory behind this, now that we've identified a problem, let's get in the solution part of it and figure out what we've got to do to make it work. Is that kind of the theory behind it?
Go ahead, Bree. I'm
Oh,
glad to
sorry, I'm
chime in,
just
but
processing what he said. So
yeah.
can you just ask that one more time, Jason? I'm sorry.
Sure. Now that we've identified what the problem is, let's switch gears to let's switch gears to the solution side of things,
Mhm.
and identify what the solutions are so we can get past it.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Is that kind of I guess the delicate, lack of better words, the delicate thought process behind it
Yeah.
to arrive there?
Sure, yeah, it's trying to understand the issue like to the fullest and trying to uncover, what could be underneath it, and then trying to connect them together somehow,
Mhm.
or at least in a way that they could come to a solution.
I think when we talk a little bit more about the process in a minute,
Yeah,
it'll
that
become clear kind of
exactly.
when we're gonna change the channel
Mhm,
there. So that's a really
mhm.
good question.
Yeah, and it is really good. And right now we're just kind of just touching on ways to, the communication skills when you're actually going through the steps that we will be talking about in the actual layout of the process. So
Mhm.
we'll go on to the last one we're going to be talking about today is summarizing. And summarizing, this just uses all of the combined skills that we talked about, kind of lumps them together, and it can really help focus attention on what's important to the person. And it can also be used to identify common ground. And summarizing really just helps to clarify and ensure that you have a shared understanding of what's been said. It allows us to confirm with them that we've understood what they've said. And it's a great way to connect that common ground that we spoke of. So I wrote an example here that I'll read to you. So after perhaps a person shares their opening statements and you're ready to move on, you could say, "Thank you for sharing your concerns and perspective on the situation. You mentioned that it feels hard at this point because the previous attempts to try to communicate and come to an agreement did not go the way you hoped. You do want to try to find a way to improve the situation. I heard both of you mention that having a clean and respectful living environment is important and that you guys are willing to try to find a solution." So you could see how that common ground got snuck
Mhm.
in, sneaked in there.
Mhm.
Uh, so yes, that is all of the communication skills so far. And now we're actually going to dive into the meeting part of it. So what it looks like in the process to where you can actually put these communication skills into
Mhm.
practice.
So we have already met with the two participants. Time. This is okay. Now we're back to recording. Great. Participants agree to practice common courtesy and not to act in ways that will make the conflict worse. So we all have ways we can push each other's buttons, but we're asking participants to stay away from it. They kind of know how to do that. And we're asking them to participate with common courtesy. Don't make things worse unless we're trying to have a productive conversation. Participants, the next one is participants are going to participate in good faith. So they're not going to hold back important information, and they're not going to make assumptions about what the other person's thinking or feeling. Instead, they're going to ask. So we're asking them to participate, with kind of the best intention and assuming the best intention in the other person. So we lay out the ground rules, we give a little introduction. We're also then going to get opening statements. And so the opening statements are really basic. We try to really sum up the questions that we asked ahead of the meeting, into these two questions. What brought us here? What is it can you describe the situation to me, the mediator? And at this point, they're talking to me, they're not, or to you, they're not talking to each other yet. They're just laying out the situation as they understand it. And then the next question is, what are you hoping for out of this process? What would be a win for you? And just to name that up front is fine. It's a good place to start negotiating when it's time for that. And generally speaking, I ask the person who brought the concern to speak first, but sometimes if it's not clear, kind of who did, maybe I brought the issue and said, hey, it'd be really helpful for the two of you to mediate this. And so I'll ask if someone wants to go first. That person speaks. The mediator, reflects back all of those skills that we just talked about, that Brianna just listed. Those are things that that we do in reframing and neutralizing and restating. So when a person speaks, I'm going to say, okay, let me make sure I've got this right. So then I'm taking notes and I reflect back a few of those things that they said to them in a hopefully a neutral kind of way. And then the next person speaks and I do the same thing. And then I give an opportunity sometimes for them to add on a little bit. So I just want to make sure I understand the whole situation that brings us here. So is there anything else that needs to be said? And once I've summarized that for them, and again, the real hope in doing that is that each person hears what the other person has to say. And so as a mediator and a restater, I'm not assuming that the person is hearing what the other person has to say. I'm helping in that process with my reframe and my restatement and neutralizing and so on. So then trust is built in the meeting if the ground rules are followed, and if and people are really able to hear each other. We're starting to build something that's going to lead to the next place. All right, so let's talk about building an agenda for the meeting for the rest of the time together.
Yeah. Here. All right. Let me see what's showing here. Sorry, I'm just gonna. All right, so here, we'll get on. I'll go over this, but this is just some examples and a visual of some words that you could put on the agenda. So, yeah, the main objective of the agenda, you would use a transition statement, something like this. So I'll go ahead and read it. It would have something along the lines of thank you for listening, for sharing. We're going to now create a brief agenda, and this was going to be 1 or 2 word items. And then letting them know that a consensus and agreement is not necessary. So like an example transition statement, you just want them to make it clear to them, those 3 points. So an example could be, thank you for sharing your perspectives and listening to one another. Now that we've heard what has brought us here, we can move away from the past and begin thinking about the future. We want to create a list of important issues and items for us to discuss. We want both of you to contribute, although it's not necessary that you agree on a topic for it to be listed on the agenda. And then you check in with them. What are some topics you would like to see on the agenda? And so the agenda it's simply just a list of items to talk about, and it really helps create a roadmap or a framework for the conversation, and it helps to make sure that everything that they wanted to talk about is talked about. And it's a really important step. You can't skip over it, even if 1 or 2 things come from the agenda. That's okay. we really want to have this as a visual, as a place to kind of track progress as well.
Mhm.
And this is where that neutralizing language can come into play as well. You know, perhaps like from that example, somebody says, I want to talk about Becca being a slob. And then you can neutralize it and say, okay, so I'm going to put on here, share, cleaning shared living space, something like that.
Yeah.
So yes, and so here's some examples that could come out of what was said, like respect, communication, noise volume, privacy. Um, yeah, and it just helps go from the past because we did the opening statement and going into the future, more forward future thinking of, okay, how are we going to resolve it? Kind of transitions their brain from thinking in the past to what do we actually want to talk about and communicate about.
Mhm.
Yeah, anything to add on that, Alan?
I'd just say just really important not to skip steps. So far, you
Mhm.
can tell there's some detail here and some, but we really have to kind of, as Jason asked in his question, we really do frame what brought us here. Really important to get there. And we get that all out and done so that when we transition to this next place, we really are, as Bree said so well, we're moving forward now. And so what's going to help? How are we going to resolve this? What kind of agreements do you need to make in order to make this happen?
Mhm.
And so that's where we're headed next.
Yeah, and I
And I
guess
would say if something's really, I'll add one more thing real quick,
yeah,
is
go
if
ahead.
something is really complicated, let's say this is a longer standing relationship or there's just a lot of issues, it's okay to say, hey, in this meeting, why don't we just tackle these three? And then let's see where we stand. And then if we need to schedule another time together, because people do get fatigued. And if the agenda is 6 items long, you're just not going to get there, generally speaking, unless they're really easy kinds of things. So just encourage you to only bite off what you think they can chew. So
Mhm.
sorry, Bree, go ahead. You're going to
Oh,
say something.
no, that's really important. I was just gonna add, it's important to get topics from both people. Like if one person's dominating all the topics, you really want to focus to
Yeah.
try to check in with the other person and encourage them
Mhm.
to either, be in agreement with, well, they don't have to agree, but to just check in with them and see if there's anything that
What's
they would
missing?
like
Yeah.
to add, right?
Yeah. That's right.
And yeah.
One question I typically ask in the agenda building is just if we got to these things today, would you think, and made some agreements about these things, would we have accomplished what you were hoping for? And if not, is there anything missing from that? So really trying to dig into, does this cover it? So remember, we talked about negotiating in good faith means that you're bringing everything to the table that you want to work on. And so hoping that they'll kind of lean into that and finish the list for you.
Mhm.
All right, well, let's keep going. I'm aware of time and I know we want to get into a little bit of a role play here soon. So in negotiating then, what happens is, again, we're sort of transitioning from past to present and future. And so the mediator backs off a bit. The mediator just literally, when I'm in a thing and I'm heavily involved at the beginning part, I'll literally lean back in my chair at this point. And as I describe what's going to happen next, I just let them know that, okay, this is your time to speak to one another. So you're no longer talking to me. You've told me the story of what brought us here. And so now let's talk about, it's time to start thinking of some solutions. What are some ideas and solutions that the two of you have? And we're going to do it one item at a time. So, so let's talk about communication. And a mediator only intervenes to keep things on track, maybe to summarize or to ask clarifying questions that would keep things going. And one thing that's really important about the agenda, moving from agenda to the actual media, the negotiation piece, is the mediator can suggest things in a particular order. And I generally think it's best to start with an easy one. If there's an agreement that you think that could probably be reached about an easy thing, so we can tackle an easy thing first and have a little victory and then work toward the more complex things. So trust gets built along the way. We celebrate a little victory, so let's talk, maybe the easy thing is, let's talk about the light being on, and how is there an agreement that you all could reach about maybe how we're going to deal with lights in the room. Or that could be the big, heavy, awful thing, in which case then that goes further down the list, right? So starting with something that you think might be conquerable. Then ultimately what we're working towards is agreements. And as the mediator, you're going to be the scribe, and you're going to just take some really quick notes about some things. There's a whole session, if you go through a 40-hour training, that talks about writing good agreements, but they essentially need to be, if you're kind of familiar with SMART goals, it's kind of similar to SMART goals, where they need to be something that you can observe, they need to be doable, they need to be really concrete, they need to be specific, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of the final product of the meeting, is this sort of list of agreements that'll come up. So let's talk about caucus, and then we'll pretty quickly dive into this. So a caucus is important. So a caucus happens, it's essentially a conference between the mediator and each of the participants. And so one of the participants goes to the restroom or goes out of the room in a place where they can't hear what's going on, and the mediator spends time with with one of the participants, and then you switch and spend time with the other one, and you really try to sort of even out the time. So if you're 10-15 minutes with one person, you want to spend about 10-15 minutes with the other. Always, again, into that neutrality is really important. But the caucus happens typically when we're at an impasse. So the participants are talking and they just can't come to an agreement on something, and they're frustrating each other, and it feels like we need a timeout. The caucus is a great way to do that. And it also kind of moves the conversation forward. So it's private, it's separate, it's doubly confidential. That means that what happens in caucus stays in caucus. So it's a time where each participant gets to talk to the mediator confidentially, not in the presence of the other one, and they're just checking in. And so this is where we're going to talk about. I usually start a caucus with, "How are you doing? How's this going for you?" And just getting a sense of where they're at. Do they have hope for the process? And then trying to troubleshoot maybe a little bit of, or what do you think would be helpful? Or what do you want to say that you've not been able to say? Those kinds of things. But it's a place for them to brainstorm in a safe place, and maybe even practice something. So they say, "Yeah, I'd like to try to talk about such and such, but I don't even know how to bring it up." And I'll just say, "Well, let's try. Why don't you just brainstorm or why don't you just role play with me a little bit and try it, see how it sounds." And then give them the opportunity to do that. And then again, so you have a caucus with one, you have the caucus with the other, and then we come back together. And there's something, I'll just say it this way, there's something kind of magic about the caucus. It creates trust. It gives people the opportunity, it gives a pause, which can be helpful to give both participants the opportunity to think a bit bigger picture. If something went wrong in that initial mediation space, they can kind of regroup and come back and maybe a little more constructive space. But it seems to really make a difference. And we see really good things happen in caucus. All right. So next is just so let's say they come back to the meeting. They come up with another agreement or two. You're writing those down as the mediator. And then you're going to commit to once you've gotten through the agenda and they've come up with hopefully some agreements. And maybe one or two of the items has to wait until another conversation, and you say, "Well, looks like we're kind of getting tired. Let's maybe not tackle that today," or whatever. But generally speaking, you want to try to have agreements on all of the agenda items. And you're going to volunteer to type those up or write those up so that you can get them to both parties, and say this is, and you're going to give them an opportunity after the meeting to reflect back. And if it doesn't quite say what they thought that said, you want to use as much of their language as possible, not your own. And so generally at the end of the meeting, I'll usually read that and say, "Okay, these are the agreements I have jotted down," and I'll try to make them sound a little better when I write them, but here's the basics. And I'll just go through and say, it sounds like you agreed to this, and this. Does that sound right? Yep. Okay, great. I'll type them up and I'll get them to you. And then let's meet in a week. Unless it was super intense, unless the event that led to the mediation like happened this morning and it was a huge blow up, maybe I need to check in 24 hours from now or 48 hours from now, depending on how intense the situation was in the house. But then we'll make just some agreements about what's going to happen between now and the next time we meet. And I'll usually suggest, hey, would you just give each other the good faith assumption? Meaning, would you give each other a little bit of space? Trust that the other person is going to take these agreements seriously. Please take your side of the agreement seriously. And we're going to get together and we're going to just do a little, we're going to grade, we're going to, kind of grade ourselves on how this whole thing went. And now I just caught myself because I don't think we should say grade ourselves because you're not a participant in this. So I think just being able to say you're going to evaluate how the situation is played out and how these agreements are working for you. And so then you'll get together in that next meeting and talk about it and maybe come up with another agreement or two or reword the agreements a little bit and then be able to get to that. All right, I want to pause here. We're already over schedule, but I want to pause here and just see if anyone has questions before we do a brief, super brief role play. Questions that come up for anyone about any of this stuff that we can try to tackle before we do this. And you can either unmute yourself or you can write them in the chat, whatever works for you. This is the interactive portion of the program, everybody. So what do you got? What do you want to know? And if we don't have any, we will just dive right into the role play, and we're going to be really brief about it because we just don't have a lot of time left. But want to give you a sense of what this kind of looks like on the ground. All right.
For what it's worth, Alan, I'm very impressed by this whole process, and I'm definitely going to look into seeing where I can take the full extended version of this.
Yeah, it's really useful. I think Bree would agree. It's just, it helps you in all of life. There's just so many ways that we're able to apply this stuff. Certainly in houses, definitely, but between kids, again, I've used it in the business world, and so really helpful model. So.
Yeah, I've taken some effective communication classes over the years, but none of it has, what do I want to say, resonated, especially within clean and sober living situations as this does.
Yeah, this is really, we hope you can use this. We hope it really is usable. All right, we're going to dive in. If you have questions, let's save them to the end. And I've asked Brianna and Blair to take it easy on me, and that we're not going to go super deep here because we're going to go fast. I mainly want you to pay attention to what the mediator, what I'm calling the mediator script, kind of looks like, what it sounds like on the ground, so you can get a sense. And I'm going to do my best to use those skills that Brianna showed us, and we'll see how it goes. And performance anxiety aside, we're going to dive into this. Ready? All right. And thanks in advance for you two. And we'll try to do this for maybe, maybe 10, 15 minutes, and we'll handle any kind of questions at the end. We'll see where it goes. It's not a lot of time to do this, but it's our first time through. We'll see how it goes. So welcome. Are we going to use your actual names? We're going to do that?
We had it down as me as Laura and then her as Kim, but either way we'd know what you're doing.
Oh gosh, let's use your names.
Yeah, I'm kidding. Okay.
I can barely remember your names. Let's just sort of see. I'm just kidding. All right, here we go. So hey, welcome you two. I'm so glad that you were able to do this, and I just want to make sure you know kind of how this sort of fits into your time here at the house. As you know, we're requiring you to have this conversation with each other. We're requiring you to be here, but I just want to be clear that we're not requiring that you come up with any particular solution. We want the solution, any solutions that we come up with, to be yours today. And so I just want to commend you for being here. And I just want to encourage you to just do your best to get everything out of this that you can, and really bring your real self to the table. I just want to start off and just ask, could both of you silence or turn off your cell phones? I've done that, and that'll be helpful for us to get to a good place in the conversation. Cell phones can be really distracting, and we've scheduled, I'll just make this up. We've scheduled an hour for this conversation. And so we trust that we're not going to be interrupted. I've asked people not to come in the office here while we do this. So if you could commit to that, that would be really helpful. This is one of the most difficult and important things that you'll do while you're living with us, is to work through is to work through difficult, conflicts and situations where you don't agree with each other. And so again, I'm really glad that you're here, and I just want to encourage you. I've seen this work a lot of times, and so I think it could be really good. I just want to talk you through the process a little bit. Just relax. I've got a couple minutes of just telling you what this is going to look like, and then we'll dive in to the actual conversation, and we can well, I've asked you both to bring something to the table, and so we'll get to that here in a minute. But first of all, mediation is a voluntary process. So as I said, we're requiring you to be here to participate in the process, but anything that you come up with in the way of solutions is voluntary. It's up to the two of you. Mediation is also a confidential process. So we're not going to talk about what takes place here outside of the meeting, except for if there's something we need to clarify with maybe someone else in the house who might be involved in the situation. But otherwise, this is going to stay between the three of us. So when we're all done here today, I'm going to ask for your notes, and we're going to destroy those. Unless there's something that you needed to write down to take somewhere else, we're going to all just get rid of our notes so that we can move forward, except for the agreements that you come up with. So there are only a couple exceptions to that, and hopefully, we're not going to run into these, but I feel like I need to say them. So it's confidential process, unless someone threatens somebody else, which I don't think is going to happen here today, but just in case, that might need to go outside of the meeting. And if either of you plan to commit or conceal any ongoing policy violations, that might be need to be dealt with sort of outside of the meeting here. And so the stuff I think we're going to talk about probably doesn't have anything to do with policies of the house, but if it does, we may need to take that into different territory. But for now, it sounds like most of these issues that we've talked about so far are between the two of you. But so my role as the mediator is I'm acting as a mediator. I'm not a staff member in this particular role. So I'm sort of taking off my house director hat, setting it aside in order to help the two of you facilitate this conversation. So unless there are policy issues that need to be decided or clarified, I'm not going to step into my house director role. I'm going to just act as a mediator. I'm going to be an impartial facilitator. So I'm not an advocate for either of you. I'm an advocate for both of you, is the way I like to think about it. And I'm not a judge. I'm not going to be the one deciding what's going to happen in this situation today. It doesn't matter, honestly, what I think about the situation. And I'm going to try to just be as open to both of your perspectives as possible. And my hope is that you'll see me as someone who's neutral in this situation. I really don't have skin in the game. This is between the two of you. But I am going to assist you in arriving at your own solutions. So you're going to be the one generating the ideas here when we get to that point. So your responsibilities are two, and just a couple things I want to ask of you is one is that you'll mediate in good faith. And what I mean by that is that you'll be willing to really listen to each other instead of maybe thinking about the next thing you're going to say or argue about. And so we're going to give you the opportunity to do that. We're going to ask you to share all the relevant information. So please don't hold back something that's relevant to the conversation to use later. This is the place to bring those things to the table. Next, I want to ask you to keep an open mind and to negotiate without holding to a fixed position. That just means I know there are things that both of you would like to see come out of this, but if you'd be willing to sort of hold those loosely and be able to listen really carefully to the other person to see if there's something maybe between the two that you can agree on. So that's one thing, negotiating in good faith. The next thing I'm going to ask is that you abide by rules of common courtesy. So this just means that that I'm going to ask you not to interrupt each other and not to use inflammatory language. We kind of know how to push each other's buttons, and they're going to ask that you refrain from doing that. So can both of you agree to mediate in good faith and using common courtesy?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, can you do that?
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Blair. You too, Bree?
Yeah.
All right. Well, I appreciate that. That's going to be really helpful. So here's what the process is going to look like. All right. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to ask each of you to make what we call an opening statement. That's just basically for you to tell me what's going on. It's that question that I asked you before. What is it that brought us here? And then what you're hoping for. So I'll ask that question really clearly. The next thing we're going to do once I've heard from both of you and I'm really clear that I've heard what you had to say, we're going to develop an agenda. An agenda is just simply what we want to talk about today. We may not be able to talk about all the issues that each of you have, but we're going to try to tackle the biggest ones maybe and And so we're going to form a little list of what those things are to keep us on track. And then we're going to ask you to talk to each other and actually start coming up with some solutions. So we've basically talked about what brought us here. We're going to talk about what we want to talk about. And then we're going to ask the two of you to spend some time talking to each other about coming up with some good solutions. If there's a place where we kind of get stuck, maybe there's just a disagreement that we can't work through, and it feels like it might be a good time for a break, I'm going to call for what's called a caucus. And a caucus is just simply a meeting between two of us. So I'll talk with you, Bree, and then I'll talk with you, Blair, or vice versa. And and that's just the time where we can together maybe help problem solve and then come back together in the hopes of maybe coming to some agreements. So we may or may not need a caucus. Today, we're not going to do a caucus because we won't have time. but generally, I want to make that available to folks. So in the end, what we're hoping for is to come up with some agreements. And I'm going to be the scribe. I'm going to write down some things that I think might be what I'm hearing you two agree about. And then I'll run those by you at the end and we'll go from there. So so that's basically what it looks like. Any questions from either of you about that process? Does that all make sense?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to give you both some paper and pens here so that again, while we're doing these first comments, that if you have something you want to say, be sure to just jot it down and you can come back to it. So now we're going to do this opening statement part that I talked about. I'm going to ask each of you to share your perspective, right? It's an opportunity to share what brought us here from your perspective. Just want you to tell me the situation. You're going to speak directly to me, and this is uninterrupted time. So please just give the other person the respect of not interrupting and write down if you need to say something. And let's go ahead and dive in. So. And then I'll give a chance. I'll probably go back and forth once or twice too, to be sure that both of you get a chance to respond to something the other person said, if there's more to sort of fill in the story.
Yeah.
All right. So would one of you be willing to go first?
I'll go first.
Is that all right? Does that work for you, Bree?
Yeah, she could go
Okay.
first.
All right. So Blair, tell us what brought us here and what are you hoping to get out of this situation?
I feel like Bree does not respect my space and my privacy. She
Okay.
leaves her things all over the place and she doesn't clean up after herself. And it feels like she's doing it on purpose because all the time I ask her to clean up and she gives me like rude responses and she never does what I ask. And I'm just fed up with it. I can't live like this. And not to mention, she doesn't even talk to me or hasn't acknowledged me this whole past month. She just comes in, makes messes, leaves all day, and then I have to sit around and look at her mess all day.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Blair. So if I heard you right, I heard that you have concerns about the way that the room is kept, and that that Brianna leaves her stuff around, doesn't clean up very well, and so it feels. What I'm hearing is that it doesn't feel respectful of your space. I think you said that, and then when she is around, it sounds like she doesn't pay much attention to you. And so when you want to talk about this or something else, it sounds like she doesn't pay a lot of attention to you. And so again, it feels like it's you're not being respected, both your space and even your person.
Yeah, that's why I asked for a room change
Okay,
because of all
I
of
get it.
this.
All right. Is there anything I left out of what you said? I just want to make sure I heard you right.
You got it.
Okay, all right. Brianna, can you answer those same questions? What brought us here and what would you like to see different?
Yeah. So, I mean, I understand I'm not the cleanest person in the world, but I do try to keep the room clean. I feel like Blair is just being oversensitive. I've tried to clean and keep things tidy, but it's just not always possible. I'm busy. I have my visitation with my kids that they're really important in my life, and work. So I have things that are more important than just trying to clean to Blair's standards. So I also feel like Blair's just been really rude this past month. And with me, I just feel like it's easier to ignore her because whenever I do try to talk or that her anger just gets in the way. I mean, you heard her comments right then. She's just kind of rude, and I don't really want to talk to her about it. I honestly don't even think it's about the cleaning. I just think she doesn't like me. And she keeps talking about having her space being respected, but she's never respected me or even any of the things that I've let her borrow.
Okay.
She just doesn't respect them.
Okay.
That's it.
Right. Brianna, let me make sure I got this. And then if there's anything I missed, you can fill me in. All right.
Okay.
So it sounds like you make an effort to clean the room, and you feel like you've done an okay job. I appreciate at the beginning you said you're not perfect. But it sounds like you and Blair have different ways, different maybe standards of what clean is. And when you and living together kind of brings those things out. It sounds like you have a lot going on in your life, seeing your kids and the other things that you're working on maybe takes you away from the house a fair amount. So the two of you don't see each other very much. And you said that you've tried to communicate with Blair, but on the occasions that you have, it doesn't sound like it went very well. And you said that your communication styles are different, and that you don't feel respected sometimes when Blair talks to you. And it sounds like as I listen to you, that the respect is a really important thing to you, and so both in your space and especially in your kind of close living space with someone who's your roommate. So anything I missed in that? I'm sorry if I was writing pretty fast there, but anything that feels important to add to that?
No, I mean, yeah,
Okay.
I think respect is a huge one. She's just, the respect
Okay.
isn't there.
Okay.
So.
So normally, I'm going to break out of the role play for a second here. Normally, we would go back and forth once or twice. I would ask Blair if she has something she wants to respond to that Bree said, or vice versa. Is there anything more that I need to know about the situation? Again, this is a really simplified version just for the sake of our time. But so normally this would take longer, and we would dig into it a little bit, make sure that we get the whole story from both. And normally they probably would respond to each other a little bit and say, I don't think it's fair to, to say that I'm not being respectful when ... So again, through neutralizing the conversation, reframing, speaking back, articulating what I heard, hopefully the goal would be to really lay out the story in a way that both people could kind of agree to, yep, that's the story. But that sometimes takes a bit to get to. But we're gonna jump down to agenda building, if that's all right, because we're
Sure.
just about at time. So we'll do that, and then we might break out at that point. But so I'm wondering if of the things that we've talked about in the last few minutes, I'm really thankful that the two of you really brought what's real to the table, and I'll trust that that's it. And so what things you want to be sure we talk about? If we were to come up with just maybe a list of 3 or 4 things at most that we want to be sure that we talk about, that you talk about with each other and try to make some solutions, what might be on that list? And I'll just jot them down here to keep us on track.
Definitely respect, but
Okay.
respect in the way that she talks to me. I mean, I don't want to do anything for her if she's being
Okay, we can get to that, but so respect sounds like a really
Yeah.
important thing. All right, what else? That covers a lot. So that seems like important in what both of you said. What else?
I want to talk about, I guess, how I mean, I don't have anything against her. It like makes me upset to see the mess.
Okay,
And
is it
so
about,
maybe that's why
do we want to
I
talk about
might come off.
cleanliness or something like that? Like making some agreements around how you keep the room?
Yeah, it would probably be helpful.
Okay, so I'll just talk about, I'll just write down cleanliness, and we'll kind of know that'll take us down that road a little bit.
I guess I want to talk about just the things I've let her borrow and how she's returned them to me.
Okay, all right. So should I write down things or possessions? Maybe is that a good word?
Well, if you're gonna write that down, you should also write down that she's not following through with her promises, because she tells me that she'll clean it and she doesn't.
Okay, so something about keeping commitments or something like that. Does that sound like what you're getting at, Blair?
Yeah.
Okay. Right, so we have four, a couple of them, they're pretty closely related to each other, but anything else that we're missing that if you leave here today, you want to be sure you have talked about this.
Mm,
I
yeah.
might suggest one if you're open to it. I
Okay.
wonder if we could just talk about communication, how the two of you communicate with each other.
Yeah.
Because it sounds like maybe you've missed each other a little bit, and it might be helpful to have some agreement about how you want to be heard and hear the other person.
Yeah, I'm okay.
Sound all right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. So of this list, I wonder if we could maybe start with the things, with the possessions. I don't know that that's the best place, but it seems like it's a good a place to start as any. And so I think we're going to do a timeout here, and I'll just say, so I picked that one because I think it's kind of a concrete thing that maybe we can make some agreements about moving forward. So instead of kind of living in the past, we're going to talk about what it would be like to move forward in this area. And then we would have the two of you dive in, probably have Brianna start to talk about what's that concern, and then I would basically say, so now I'm going to give the two of you the opportunity to talk to each other. We have the agenda. I may interject with a question or two to kind of keep us on track, but let's talk about the possessions issue first, and then I would kind of let that go. So the rest of the process is just that conversation playing itself out, me interjecting if I need to remind participants about ground rules that we agreed to, about common courtesy and good faith, me interjecting with a question or two if I feel like I can kind of bring it back to the main issues, and then me interjecting if there's an agreement, and you make an agreement, and then I'll write it down, and then at the end I would read the agreements, caucus if necessary. So sorry we didn't get a chance to demonstrate what that negotiation process looks like because we ran out of time, but I wanted to at least give you a sense of what the rest was going to look like. I'm just going to open it up now for just questions from the group. Are there things that you want to know? You can unmute yourself, and just things about the process, anything that would be helpful to know from your perspective.
Hey, Alan, what are some
Yeah.
things that we could do in addition to this? Like, do you have some other good resources so that we can continue to work on this process? Like,
Yeah,
you have such great responses, you know, how can we hone those skills? Is it just doing it, or are there some resources?
I would say role play. So even get together with two other people in this group or somewhere else and just practice this stuff. Our responses come from doing it and doing it over and over again, and realizing, and kind of being really present and really focusing in on that list of skills that Bree walked us through is gold. And that's exactly what we're doing in the midst of all of this. So,
or you could just practice with, people in your family or your coworkers and stuff, maybe practice the reflective listening and the reframing, just being consciously aware of like, how can I say this back to the person? That could, it's always, good tool.
That's right. But I would look up and see if in Walla Walla there's a dispute resolution center somewhere. I don't know how many there are across the state. There are a number of them. I wonder where the nearest one is and where you could go do a 40-hour training, which I know is a big ask, but just the fruit of that is so good. We just gave you a taste today, but to really get your arms around it, it would be helpful to kind of go through the whole thing, I think. But it just, I think those kind of role play practices are fantastic. Other questions, either about process or anything else that we can answer before we sign off? We're going to pop our, let's put up our contact info, Brianna, and just in case anyone wants to be in touch with either of us. But in the meantime, any other questions from participants? Anything else that you're curious about?
So, Alan, do you always come to an agreement? I mean, are there situations where the participants
I'm
aren't
always
willing
looking
to
for an
complete,
agreement, and maybe it's not the big grand agreement that solves everything,
find
but
some
maybe
agreement.
there are just some things
Okay.
like what could you do that would, so maybe a clarifying question I would ask along the way is what could you do that would help? What would you ask of so and so that would make your life better in the room, in this area, right? So you're sort of helping them say out loud, well, the light needs to be out by 8 o'clock. Like, all right, well, what do you think, Brianna? Could the light be out by 8 o'clock? Boy, that's too early. I couldn't do that. I could probably agree to 9 o'clock, understanding that every once in a while I might have to break that. Okay, could you live with that? Sure. So kind of teasing out, I think that again, that clarifying question is what would help instead of what would solve everything, right? And maybe we can make some sub agreements,
So Alan, is it like do you do it on a case by case basis? I realize the end is to come up with an agreement, but what if at the end of this, Blair just says, I'm sorry, I just feel too disrespected. I cannot continue to stay in the same room as this woman.
I would usually say, I mean, it's pretty rare actually. Normally they'll agree to try something for a week.
Okay.
And that's what I'll ask of them is could we try these agreements for a week and let's come back and just assess how it's going.
Perfect.
And you'll be amazed. You'll be just amazed how folks who have just not done this kind of stuff before, if they honor the agreements, it kind of works. Like most of the stuff is not insurmountable. They're just little things that add up to big things, And so so let's give it a week and really try to honor those agreements, and we'll come back and evaluate how you did with them. And then do they need to be adjusted? Usually by that end of that first week, they may adjust the agreements a little bit, but they're kind of over the hump, and it generally tends to work out. If not, then at least they've tried something, and maybe there's an opportunity down the road for a roommate swap to work, and we may grant that, but it's not because they haven't tried. You know what I mean? Yeah. So, and I understand this probably flies in the face a little bit of values we might have in giving people choice about where they live. I understand that. We're trying to help folks develop a skill set while they're living in our homes to work through things. And this is about the best possible way that can happen, is practicing and trying to work through something that's hard instead of just leaving, right? In a lot of ways, bailing is kind of old behavior, right? And so we don't want to facilitate just bailing when it's not working out. We want to at least show them how they can try. And then if that's not effective and there's just still some intransigence or whatever, then maybe we've got to grant it for the sake of the bigger picture, right? But at least they had a taste of working through something. So, all right. I think Brianna, anything else that you want to add to the mix before we sign off?
No, just that, yeah. I mean, I agree with everything that you said, Alan, that it's just such an important tool, especially to people who haven't practiced it.
Yeah.
And it's a great tool for you as well to be a support to them.
Yeah. If you all want to, I'm making this up here, but if the group said, if we heard back from enough folks that said, hey, we'd like to do another, maybe just watch a more extended role play or do some practice or whatever, we might be able to facilitate something like that in another webinar or a small group kind of a setting. So we'd love to hear back if this was valuable to you. And please drop us an email if you'd like the slides. We can get those out. I think I'd like to just limit the slides to folks who were here because they're going to make a lot more sense to the people who were watching. But if you want slides, drop an email to Brianna and she'll send them to you. And then and we'd be glad to help out in other ways if we can.
Yeah. How about I'll just send the slides to everyone who is on this webinar today.
Great.
So let's go ahead and do that. And then, yes, give us, we'll have Blair put something in the survey that talks about doing maybe another
Another session,
an extended version of this. We can definitely do. Probably should have extended it a little longer, but hey,
Right.
you know, for next
Well,
time.
next time. Well, we hope it's helpful, and we really want to
Yeah.
hear your honest feedback about it. It's the first time we've done this in
Yeah.
this super short format, so would love to hear how it was for you, and please be in touch and let us know. With that, I think we'll sign off, and we'll thank you again for being here, and we'll see you at a future webinar.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care, everybody.